Shots have been fired in Kabul as the Taliban moves to disperse protests. The shots were fired into the air to scatter a crowd outside the Pakistani embassy. Dozens of people, mostly women, had gathered to protest interference by Afghanistan's neighbour, who they accused of supporting the Taliban. Pakistan's intelligence chief was in Kabul at the weekend and is believed to have met Taliban leaders. The clashes come as U.S. officials hold talks in Qatar. They say they are working with the Taliban to speed up evacuations for those left behind.
We're conducting a great deal of diplomacy on this as we speak. We've also been engaging with the Taliban on this topic, including in recent hours. They've said that they will let people with travel documents freely depart. We will hold them to that. So will dozens of other countries. The international community is watching to see if the Taliban will live up to their commitments.
There are certain standards needs to be met, especially from a security perspective, a security point of view, if we want to board passengers on those flights. Those needs an agreement with Taliban, which is still in negotiation.
Kate Fisher joins us live from Washington, D.C. Kate, what's the sense? Can the U.S. hold the Taliban to its pledge to allow evacuations?
Well, that is certainly what they're saying. As you heard there, they say that in just a matter of the last few hours, they have reminded the Taliban that they and the international community will be holding them to account on those commitments to allow safe passage. But it does seem very hard to imagine how they are going to enforce that, since they no longer have a military or diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. These words are strong, but we don't quite know how they intend to put them into action. I mean, things like the airport in Kabul is still not in action for international flights. How are they going to get these people out of the country? They also told us, Secretary of State Antony Blinken talked about a family of 4 who have fled Afghanistan overland and said that the Taliban allowed that to happen. But we've also heard reports of planes waiting in Mazar al-Sharif to leave the country, and the people there saying that the Taliban are not letting them leave. The US has not confirmed the status of those flights, but certainly it does seem to be a really challenging situation for the Americans to now help those people that remain. They say there are 100 of them that they are in direct contact with. They each have an individual case manager, but without anybody actually on the ground, nobody's quite sure how they're going to get them out.
Evacuations aside, what other help will the Americans be looking to relying on Qatar for?
Well, they have relied on them a lot already, haven't they? This trip there has been full of humble gratitude from the Americans. Antony Blinken saying that they have deep gratitude for them, that the country will be remembered for a long time for giving these people the first stop on their more peaceful and hopeful future. But they really do need their help still, because the Qataris are still on the ground in Afghanistan. And as we just mentioned, the Americans are not. So they need them specifically in places like Kabul airport, which is still not functioning as an international hub for flights. It has, thanks to Qatari engineers, it now is functioning for domestic flights because of a radio system they've set up. But that air traffic control that is needed to allow international flights in and out has still not happened. And the Americans will need to rely further on their allies like the Qataris, who are actually still in Afghanistan, to get things like that done.
Kate Fisher is in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Well, at the same time, the United Nations has appealed for more aid for Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover. It says an additional $200 million is needed to provide food, essential health services and sanitation to more than 14 million people. Now, that would bring the total aid required to $600 million by the end of the year. The UN had repeatedly said that Afghanistan is facing a looming humanitarian catastrophe. It's called on the international community to donate generously. Afghanistan is highly dependent on foreign aid, and even before the Taliban takeover, such help made up more than 40% of its GDP.